We've all watched an action film that felt off. The pacing stuttered, a character's motive never quite made sense, or the final showdown lacked the punch it should have delivered. You walked away thinking, something's missing. But what if that feeling wasn't just in your head? In Hollywood, what makes it to the screen is only half the story. Somewhere between the director's vision and the studio's bottom line, scenes vanish. Entire moments, raw, emotional, brutal, or too revealing, are removed without warning, without explanation, and sometimes without a trace. They're not in the trailers, not in the deleted scenes, not even in the director's cut. They simply disappear, like they were never filmed. But they were. Sometimes it's politics, sometimes fear, sometimes a twist too disturbing, too honest, or too real for a test audience to stomach. These cuts don't just change the film's length, they change its soul. And years later, when actors speak in interviews or script pages surface in old boxes, we learn the truth. A pivotal dream sequence, a brutal moral debate, a revealing line of dialogue, all stripped away before the film ever saw daylight. These aren't alternate endings or simple reshoots. These are the lost frames, moments erased by invisible hands, leaving behind only questions. So, what were we never meant to see? What scene changed the entire character arc until it was cut? And more importantly, who decided we shouldn't see it? Tonight, we dig into the shadows of action cinema. The following are 15 films that were released incomplete, stories that once had sharper edges, deeper pain, or unsettling truths until someone made sure those frames never left the editing room. Let's dive into the countdown. Fak Shabak Wahed Raw Nerve, Elif Watisr Mia, Wa Wahed Watisron. There's a moment in Raw Nerve where the story jolts forward, but the audience is left scrambling to understand why. The protagonist suddenly shifts from confusion to clarity, yet the bridge between those emotional states is nowhere to be found. Directed by David A. Pryor, Raw Nerve was already a low-budget thriller treading strange psychological ground. But there was one scene shot, edited, and briefly shown during a private pre-screening that explained everything. In it, the main character awakens from a nightmare, drenched in sweat, gasping a name he wasn't supposed to know. It was a revelation, a subconscious leak pointing to his repressed guilt and fractured identity. According to a crew member, the scene was unsettlingly quiet, scored only by the sound of the ceiling fan and the lead actor's panicked breathing. But that was exactly the problem. The studio feared it changed the film's genre from pulpy thriller to psychological character study. Too ambiguous, too slow, too dark. The footage vanished shortly before final edits. No one officially acknowledged it again. Even the DVD release failed to include it in deleted scenes. Ironically, without that scene, the film's ending feels random. The character's transformation becomes sudden, unearned. Critics noted the inconsistency, but few ever guessed the truth. The missing link was deliberately buried, and Raw Nerve was only the beginning. To Extreme Justice, 1993. Extreme Justice was meant to be explosive literally and politically. A gritty look inside rogue police units, the film danced dangerously close to real scandals involving extrajudicial killings. But one scene in particular hit too close to home. In an early cut, there was a brutal moment where members of the elite task force turn on one of their own. An internal cleansing, executed not in anger, but as a cold administrative decision. The scene was dark, deliberate, and morally devastating. It raised the question, when cops kill their own, who polices the executioners? Shot with handheld cameras and dim lighting, the sequence had a documentary rawness that made test audiences visibly uncomfortable. According to a former editor, studio execs panicked. They said it made the unit look like a death squad. Within days, the footage was pulled. No formal statement, no compromise cut. What remained was a neutered version, tension without teeth. The betrayal hinted at in other scenes made no sense without the pivotal moment of sanctioned violence. Even the film's poster promised no rules, but ironically, the edit obeyed all the invisible ones. Years later, lead actor Lou Diamond Phillips confirmed in an interview, "There was a scene that made me feel physically sick to shoot, but it told the truth. I guess that was the problem. It said its different savantast. Sometimes, the scenes that are too real don't get a second chance." Fact-3 The Final Option 1982. Also known as Who Dares Wins, this British action film attempted to glorify the SAS Britain's elite special forces. But one deleted scene almost turned that message upside down. Buried in a late script draft was a confrontation between two officers, one questioning the mission's morality, the other defending it at all costs. The dialogue was tense, philosophical, and full of doubt. "We're not heroes," one says. "We're just the best-trained killers wearing clean uniforms." The scene was filmed, insiders claim, but never made it past initial test screenings. The Ministry of Defense reportedly monitored the film's portrayal of the SAS and advised producers that the scene would cause image conflict. Whether that was a polite suggestion or backroom coercion remains unclear. What is clear is this: the final cut paints the operation as noble and surgically precise. The ethical debate is gone, the doubts are erased, and with them, any sense of complexity. In its absence, The Final Option becomes propaganda, stylish, patriotic, and shallow. But in the shadow of that missing dialogue, a deeper film once existed, one where loyalty wasn't blind and heroism came with a moral cost. And that's not the only film where a single missing scene flipped the message upside down. Fact-4. Eye of the Tiger, 1986. When Eye of the Tiger hit theaters, it opened with a patriotic, upbeat montage of a man returning home from prison, smiling, hopeful, and ready to rebuild. But that wasn't the original opening. The film was supposed to begin in silence. The first scene, now lost, reportedly showed the protagonist sitting alone in his prison cell the night before his release, reading a letter from his murdered wife. It was a moment of raw despair, no music, no dialogue, just emotion. His face said everything. According to the film's cinematographer, the sequence was so bleak that it felt like a different movie entirely. And that's exactly why it disappeared. The producers wanted an action hero, not a grieving man. "Audiences don't want to see their star cry before they punch," one executive allegedly said. The prison scene was removed. In its place, the story jumped straight to small-town America and revenge-fueled tension. But without that lost frame, the character's rage lacks weight. His motivations feel thin. He becomes another macho trope, rather than a broken man trying to make sense of senseless violence. Decades later, the original scene has never surfaced, not on DVD, not in interviews. It's whispered about, occasionally referenced, but still missing. Like the grief it tried to show, it was erased. And it wouldn't be the last time a character's humanity was trimmed for the sake of momentum. Fact-5 number 1 with a bullet, 1987. There's something jarring about number 1 with a bullet. It's not the shootouts or the mismatched buddy cop energy, it's the unearned moral clarity. Somewhere along the editing room floor lies a scene where a trusted captain is caught accepting bribes. A hidden tape, a confrontation, a quiet cover-up. According to early drafts and a storyboard artist who worked on the film, this was supposed to be the turning point, a moment that explained why the department looked the other way and why the leads were so disillusioned. The scene was filmed, a slow-burn dialogue sequence in a backroom bar where the captain stares into his drink and says, "You want justice? You should have joined the clergy." But test audiences didn't respond well. They wanted heroes, not compromised commanders. MGM made the call. Cut the scene, tighten the pace, focus on the action. The result? A film that moves fast but says little, Today, the scene survives only in script fragments. The actor who played the captain once joked in an interview, "My best scene got me fired from the movie." Truth has a way of vanishing when it makes things too complicated. Fact 26, Avenging Force. 1986. Starring Michael Dudikoff in a rare dramatic performance, Avenging Force was one of Cannon Films' darker, more atmospheric entries. But there was a time it was even darker. In an early version, there was a sequence showing the villain's recruitment method, a psychological manipulation of young ex-soldiers, filmed in handheld, almost cinema verite style. The leader's speech, part patriotism, part cultish devotion, was chilling. Viewers at test screenings were disturbed not just by the ideology, but by how convincing it was. The monologue made sense. Too much sense. One viewer even wrote, "I started agreeing with the bad guy. That scared me." The studio reacted quickly. "We can't have sympathetic fascists," one executive reportedly said. The entire recruitment sequence was removed. The villain became generic, his motivations blurred, his danger neutered. Dudikoff, when asked years later, recalled, "That scene explained why my character cared so much. Without it, it's just revenge." Once again, clarity gave way to simplicity, and the film lost its edge in the name of comfort. But there were still other films that lost something even stranger, the very heart of their stories. Fact Shabaksaba Silent Trigger Elif Watisarmia Wasita Watisarun. In Silent Trigger, Dolph Lundgren plays a brooding sniper haunted by ghosts from his past. But one scene that would have made those ghosts literal never made it to release. There were rumors of a flashback sequence shot in grainy, color-drained film where Lundgren's character hallucinates seeing the child he accidentally killed during a mission. It was meant to explain his silence, his twitchy detachment, and his refusal to take clean shots. Crew notes mention a dreamlike set, a fogged-out playground, distant laughter, and a single gunshot echoing with no visual trigger. The sequence was bold, experimental, and completely excised. According to a behind-the-scenes report, the distributor felt the scene complicated the pacing and humanized a character better left enigmatic. In other words, they feared giving him too much soul. Without it, his trauma feels distant, almost decorative. The sniper isn't haunted, just cool. The internal war hinted at in earlier drafts never reaches the screen. And so, another emotional anchor was sacrificed on the altar of genre expectations. Fact height. The Dogs of War, 1980. Christopher Walken's performance in The Dogs of War is chilling, controlled violence simmering beneath a calm exterior. But in a version that only a handful of people have seen, there was a moment where that calm shattered. A deleted scene showed Walken's mercenary breaking down in a hospital hallway after visiting a war orphan maimed by his last mission. No words, just him sitting on the floor, shaking. The footage reportedly unnerved the test audience, not because of what it showed, but because it forced empathy onto a character they thought was safely distant. They didn't want to feel sorry for him, said a production assistant who witnessed the edit. The producers agreed. The moment was too raw and possibly damaging to the film's portrayal of mercenaries as hardened professionals. The cut was swift. The footage has never resurfaced. What remains is a cold man in a colder world, his conscience, if it ever existed, left behind on the cutting room floor. Fact. Shabaktesia, bulletproof, elif watisarmea wathamania wathamanun. At first glance, Bulletproof is just another hyper-violent Cannon Films entry, big guns, explosive set pieces, and a stoic hero. But early production notes hint at a missing scene that would have flipped the narrative. A flashback sequence, storyboarded but never publicly released, depicted the protagonist as a former child soldier. The scene included a worn photograph, a whispered prayer in another language, and a moment of hesitation before the first kill. It was meant to explain his near-superhuman combat reflexes and his deep internal void. The sequence was allegedly filmed in Mexico, under tight secrecy, but executives reportedly balked at the idea of humanizing a killing machine. The flashback introduced trauma, nuance, and cultural complexity, things the final film wanted nothing to do with. Instead, we're left with an action figure, not a man. One critic later described Bulletproof as a film allergic to context, but if that flashback had survived, it might have been remembered as something far more unsettling and honest. But honesty, as we've seen, rarely survives uncut. Fact shabakwah dusfer, Stone Cold elf wa tisarmea, wa wahed wa tisron. Stone Cold is remembered for its absurd bravado and over-the-top biker gang violence. But there was once a scene that made everything feel too real, and that's exactly why it vanished. In an early cut, the gang's initiation ceremony was far more disturbing. Shot in a dilapidated warehouse with handheld cameras and real fire hazards, the sequence included actual animals, fake blood rituals, and a mock execution performed in terrifying silence. No rock soundtrack, no slow motion, just the raw initiation into chaos. Brian Bosworth, the film's star, later remarked that the scene felt like a snuff film disguised as fiction. It painted the villains not as cartoonish outlaws, but as something far more primal and cult-like. The scene terrified the studio. They feared comparisons to real-life biker crimes and worried about MPAA backlash. The footage was pulled, locked away, and never mentioned again. What replaced it? A tamer initiation montage, scored to hair metal, full of posturing but no menace. And yet, without that cut scene, the villains of Stone Cold feel oddly safe. Intense, yes, but sanitized. Sometimes, it's not the hero they need to tone down. It's the darkness on the other side. Fact Hashin 1. The Glimmer Man, 1996. Steven Seagal's The Glimmer Man walks a strange line between detective thriller and spiritual mysticism. But one cut scene reportedly pushed it deep into psychological horror territory. In the scene, Seagal's character is shown performing an off-the-books exorcism on a child murder suspect. Not metaphorical, literal. The suspect convulses. Candles explode. It's shot like a possession scene from The Exorcist. Except the detective doesn't flinch, he just whispers a prayer and walks away. The footage allegedly came from an early draft where Seagal's character had ties to Eastern mysticism and was based loosely on fringe cases involving spiritual interrogations. Test audiences didn't know what to make of it. Was it real? A hallucination? A commentary on justice? The studio panicked. "We're not making The Seventh Seal with roundhouse kicks," one exec quipped. The entire subplot was dropped. The scene never officially acknowledged. Without it, The Glimmer Man feels oddly lopsided, hints of spirituality with no payoff. A detective who quotes Zen koans but never shows why. And perhaps that's the most dangerous thing to include in an action movie. Ambiguity. 12-2, Red Scorpion, 1981. Dolph Lundgren's Soviet super soldier saga, Red Scorpion, was born from Cold War pulp, but buried within it was a scene that almost turned the entire film inside out. According to early drafts and production stills, there was a scene where Lundgren's character, Nikolai, meets an American mercenary who reveals the rebels they're helping are backed by illegal arms dealers. The conversation takes place in a scorched village, surrounded by abandoned corpses and empty vaccine boxes. It's quiet. Ash floats through the air. The American says, "Freedom's just a flag we sell to the highest bidder." Nikolai doesn't respond. He just walks away. That scene, shot near the end of production, never appeared in any known cut. Insiders suggest it was removed due to pressure from financiers with political ties. The film, after all, was partially funded by groups sympathetic to anti-communist causes. The loss of that scene shifted Red Scorpion from tragic reflection to standard revenge porn. It became less about questioning loyalty and more about glorifying it. The line between message and marketing was drawn with scissors, and the film paid for it with its conscience. 113 Rolling Thunder, 1977. On the surface, Rolling Thunder is a revenge story soaked in grit. But buried beneath the grindhouse surface was a final scene that critics say might have turned it into a quiet masterpiece. In an alternate ending screened only once in a private test audience, William Devane's character returns to his family's empty home. He sits in his son's room. The sun is setting. He picks up a toy revolver, holds it to his temple, and lowers it. No music, no resolution, just grief. The audience was stunned into silence. Studio executives were furious. "You can't end a revenge movie with a meditation on futility," one reportedly said. The scene was immediately cut. Reshoots gave the film a triumphant gunfight finale instead. What was lost wasn't just a scene, it was a truth, that vengeance doesn't heal, it only empties you. And perhaps the most dangerous scene in action cinema is the one that admits violence never really ends anything. FACT, Shabak Wahda Arba'a, Deadly Prey, 1987. Deadly Prey is remembered for its low-budget, absurd one-liners, and shirtless rampage. But there was once a version that hinted at a much darker core. According to a leaked shooting schedule, there was a sequence where the protagonist discovers he's being hunted not just by mercenaries, but by a secret government experiment designed to test combat psychology under extreme duress. The forest was rigged. The enemies were planted. The kills were being recorded. The scene was shot, confirmed by a production assistant in a podcast decades later, but ultimately scrapped for being too weird for the audience we were targeting. Producers wanted a cult action flick, not a commentary on government experimentation. What remains is mindless action. What was lost was paranoia, conspiracy, and a villain that wasn't human, but systemic. And once again, the camera flinched before the truth. 15 Time Bomb, 1991. Starring Michael Biehn as a man discovering he was once a government assassin, Time Bomb was already a surreal thriller. But it once had a scene that took the concept of memory manipulation to terrifying extremes. In the missing sequence, Bihn's character stumbles upon a film reel hidden in a CIA vault. On it, footage of himself executing civilians, smiling. The twist? He was told it was a fake memory implanted to destabilize him. But when he re-watches it, he mouths words he only knows in private. The scene blurred the line between reality and fabrication so thoroughly that test audiences reportedly left questioning the entire film. Producers panicked. The final cut removed the scene entirely and replaced it with a more straightforward reveal. Now, the film ends with clarity but no sting. Without that lost reel, Time Bomb became just another sci-fi thriller. With it, it might have been a warning, because sometimes the scariest thing is not what you remember, but what they erased for you. Stick 1985. This one didn't make the top 15, but it might just be the strangest of all. Stick, based on the Elmore Leonard novel and starring Burt Reynolds, was marketed as a stylish action thriller. What most viewers don't know is that a full 20-minute segment written and directed by Reynolds himself was cut by the studio, never screened again, and reportedly destroyed. The segment took place mid-film, where Reynolds' character suffers a breakdown after a botched hit. He retreats into the Florida Everglades and hallucinates conversations with his dead daughter. The mood shifts. No action, no explosions, just psychological decay. It was, according to Reynolds in a 1986 interview, the best thing I ever directed. But test audiences were confused, and Universal Studios was furious. They ordered reshoots, brought in another editor, and restructured the narrative into something more conventional. The lost sequence was never included in any home release. No stills, no script pages, no commentary. It simply vanished. A studio executive allegedly said, "We're not selling existential grief in a leather jacket." What survived was a disjointed, forgettable action movie. But for those who caught a glimpse of the original cut, Stick was briefly something more. A meditation on violence, memory, and a man who knew he was already dead. And just like that, it was gone, buried under marketing decisions and fear of stillness. Sometimes the loudest thing you can cut from a movie is its silence. So now you know. These films weren't just edited, they were altered. Narratives were softened, truths buried, and entire moments erased before we ever got the chance to question them. But which scene do you think changed everything? And more importantly, what other films do you suspect are hiding ghosts in their cuts? Tell us in the comments. Was it censorship, cowardice, or control? The frame was lost. But maybe the debate doesn't have to be.